The first thing Evan Moore felt after opening his eyes was cold. Not the sharp cold of winter, but a quiet, empty cold like a room where warmth had never been allowed to stay. The ceiling above him was white, unfamiliar, yet painfully familiar at the same time. The smell of disinfectant filled his nose. A hospital, again. His mind was clear. Too clear. Evan blinked slowly, and memories that did not belong to a newborn pressed down on him all at once. A full life. 32 years. A childhood of silence. A youth spent proving himself. An adulthood of exhaustion. And finally, a lonely death on a hospital bed, with no one holding his hand. He remembered everything. Including the people standing near him now. Congratulations, Mrs. Moore. It's a healthy baby boy. The woman beside the bed let out a tired breath. Another boy. Her voice was soft, polite, but there was no joy in it. Linda Moore turned her head slightly, looking past Evan, past the child she had just given birth to, toward the door. "Where's Daniel?" she asked. Evan's tiny fingers curled weakly. "So it begins." Richard Moore entered moments later, suit neat, expression composed, like he had stepped out of a meeting rather than into a delivery room. He glanced at the baby briefly, then placed his attention on his wife. "You did well," he said. "Get some rest." That was all. No smile. No reaching out. No warmth. In his first life, Evan had cried at this moment. He had wanted to be held. He had screamed until his throat burned, desperate for attention, for proof that he mattered. This time, he stayed silent. The nurse frowned slightly. "He's very quiet." "He's probably tired," Linda replied quickly, already closing her eyes. Evan stared up at the ceiling, his newborn body weak but his mind steady. "I won't beg this time." The Moore family home was large, modern, and quiet. Too quiet. From the day Evan was brought home, the difference was obvious. Daniel, the eldest son, had his photos lining the walls. Awards, school certificates, smiling pictures from piano competitions and family trips. His laughter filled the house. His opinions mattered. Evan's presence was tolerated. "He doesn't cry much," the nanny said one afternoon. "That's good," Linda replied absently. "At least he's easy." Easy. In his first life, Evan had been called difficult. Sensitive. Moody. Always unhappy for no reason. This time, he learned early that silence was safer. As a toddler, he fell and scraped his knee in the garden. He sat there quietly, watching blood bead on his skin. The pain was sharp, but familiar. Linda looked over from the patio. "Did you fall?" Evan nodded. "Be careful next time," she said, then returned to her phone. No hug. No comfort. Evan picked himself up and walked inside. He did not cry. By the time Evan was 6, the family had stopped expecting anything from him. Daniel was praised. Emma, the youngest, was protected. Evan existed somewhere in between, like a shadow that followed but was never noticed unless it got in the way. At dinner, Daniel talked about school. "Dad, my teacher said I might skip a grade." "That's good," Richard said, nodding with approval. "Keep it up." Emma laughed, swinging her legs. "Daniel is so smart." Linda smiled. "Yes, he is." Evan ate quietly. "What about you?" Linda asked suddenly, almost as an afterthought. "How was school?" "Fine," Evan replied. That was always his answer. Richard glanced at him. "Just fine." Evan met his father's eyes calmly. Nothing special happened. Richard lost interest immediately. "Eat more vegetables." The conversation moved on. Inside, Evan felt nothing. No anger. No sadness. Just confirmation. "You haven't changed." "Neither have I." At night, Evan often sat by his window, watching the city lights. In his first life, he had spent these nights wondering what he did wrong. Why love came so easily to others and not to him. Now, he understood. Love was not something this family didn't have. It was something they chose not to give to him. And so, he chose something else. Distance. When Linda tried to tuck him in one night, patting his blanket awkwardly, Evan stiffened slightly. "You don't have to," he said. She paused. I'm your mother. I know, Evan replied politely. Good night. Linda stood there for a moment, confused by the calm rejection, then turned off the light and left. In the hallway, she hesitated, a strange discomfort settling in her chest. Inside the dark room, Evan stared at the ceiling. In his first life, this house had been his prison. In this life, it would be his waiting room. And he would not wait for love that never came. He closed his eyes, already prepared to live and die alone if he had to. By the time Evan turned 15, the Moore family had grown used to the quiet space he occupied. He woke up early, left for school on his own, returned before dinner, finished his homework, and disappeared into his room. No complaints. No requests. No problems. Too perfect. That child, Linda said one evening as she folded laundry. He doesn't feel like a teenager. Richard didn't look up from his tablet. Isn't that good? At least he's not causing trouble. Linda hesitated. It's just, he never needs us. Richard gave a short laugh. You wanted him to be easy. Now he is. The conversation ended there. At school, Evan was the same. He sat near the window, answered questions when asked, and never raised his hand unnecessarily. Teachers liked him but didn't remember him. Classmates found him polite but distant. Do you want to join us for lunch? A boy once asked. No, thank you, Evan replied with a small smile. He ate alone, not because he had no one, but because he had learned something important long ago. Expectations hurt more than loneliness. Sometimes, during class, a dull ache bloomed in his chest. It wasn't sharp, just heavy, like pressure slowly building. Evan would pause, breathe carefully, and wait for it to pass. He didn't tell anyone. In his first life, he had told his parents about the pain. They had said it was stress. This time, he chose silence. Daniel noticed first. It happened during a weekend family gathering. Relatives filled the living room, laughing loudly. Evan stood near the edge, holding a glass of water, his face pale. Are you okay? Daniel asked quietly. I'm fine, Evan answered. Daniel frowned. You've been saying that a lot. Evan looked at him. Really looked at him. Daniel was still the same, tall, confident, admired. The golden child. In Evan's first life, he had hated him for it. Now, he felt nothing. I'm just tired, Evan said calmly. Daniel didn't push further, but something felt wrong. Evan suddenly swayed. The glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. Evan. Linda rushed over as he collapsed to his knees. The room fell silent. I told you, Evan said weakly, trying to stand. I'm fine. Richard's face darkened. Call the doctor. Evan shook his head. It's not necessary. But this time, they didn't listen. The hospital hallway smelled exactly the same as the one Evan had died in during his first life. White. Clean. Cold. Dr. Harris flipped through Evan's chart. He fainted from exhaustion, but there are signs we should look into. I recommend some tests. Linda clasped her hands tightly. Is it serious? We won't know yet. Evan sat quietly on the bed, eyes lowered. Richard spoke firmly. Do the tests. Evan didn't argue. When the results came back, Dr. Harris asked to speak to Evan alone. Linda hesitated. Shouldn't we? I'd like to talk to him first, the doctor said gently. The door closed. Dr. Harris studied Evan for a long moment. You're very calm. I've been sick before, Evan replied. The doctor raised an eyebrow. Have you been feeling pain? Yes. For how long? A while. Why didn't you say anything? Evan looked at his hands. There was no reason to. Dr. Harris sighed. We need more tests. I'm not ready to give a diagnosis yet, but I need you to understand something. He leaned forward. This isn't nothing. Evan nodded. I understand. Not fear. Not panic. Just acceptance. At home, the atmosphere shifted. Linda knocked on Evan's door more often. Did you eat? Do you need anything? Are you feeling okay today? Evan answered politely. Briefly. Richard started driving him to school instead of letting him take the bus. They rode in silence. Daniel tried harder. Want to watch something together? No, thank you. Do you need help with homework? I'm done already. Each rejection was calm, gentle, and absolute. It made them uncomfortable. You push people away, Daniel said one night, frustration breaking through. Why? Evan paused. Because loving you once killed me. But he didn't say that. I don't, Evan replied. I just don't reach out. Daniel stared at him, unable to understand the difference. Late one night, Evan sat at his desk, coughing softly into his sleeve. When he pulled his hand back, there was a faint trace of blood. He wiped it away without emotion. So it's starting. In his first life, he had been terrified. This time, he felt prepared. He opened a notebook and wrote a single line. Things to do before the end. Outside his room, Linda stood frozen, having come to check on him. She watched through the slightly open door as her son quietly organized his books, his clothes, his life. Not like someone planning for the future. Like someone closing a chapter. A strange fear crept into her heart. For the first time, she wondered. What if we're already too late? The hospital visit that followed was not dramatic. There were no urgent sirens, no shouting nurses, no tearful breakdowns in the hallway. Just forms, quiet footsteps, and long hours of waiting that stretched into days. Evan went through the tests without complaint. Blood draws. Scans. More questions than answers. How long have you felt tired? A while. Do you feel pain here? Yes. On a scale of 1 to 10? It doesn't matter. Dr. Harris noted everything down, his expression growing more serious each time. When the final report arrived, he did not call the Moore parents first. He asked for Evan. The consultation room was small and quiet. Sunlight filtered through half-closed blinds. Evan sat upright in the chair, hands folded neatly on his lap, as if attending a meeting rather than receiving life-changing news. Dr. Harris closed the file slowly. Evan, he said, choosing his words carefully, the results confirm what I suspected. Evan nodded. It's terminal. The doctor paused, surprised. You already knew? I guessed, Evan replied calmly. The symptoms match. Dr. Harris studied him, unease settling in his chest. You're 15. Most patients react with fear. Or anger. I've done that already, Evan said softly. In another life. The doctor didn't question the strange phrasing. He had learned that some truths were not meant to be challenged. The illness will progress slowly at first, Dr. Harris explained. Months, maybe a year. With treatment, we can manage pain, but there is no cure. I understand. Do you want me to call your parents? Evan's fingers tightened briefly, then relaxed. Not yet, he said. Please. Dr. Harris frowned. They have the right to know. They do, Evan agreed. Just not now. Why? Evan looked out the window. Because they'll start loving me too loudly. Silence filled the room. Dr. Harris sighed deeply. I can delay for a short time. But not forever. That's enough, Evan said. Thank you. As he stood to leave, Dr. Harris spoke again. Evan, you don't have to face this alone. Evan smiled politely. I already am. Life at home continued almost normally. Daniel talked about university applications. Emma complained about school. Richard worked late. Linda cooked meals that were rarely eaten together. The only difference was Evan. He grew thinner. Paler. He stopped joining family dinners altogether, choosing to eat earlier or later, always alone. When asked, he said he wasn't hungry. No one pushed him hard enough. Linda noticed small things. Evan folding his clothes carefully and placing some into a box. Evan deleting old photos from his phone but saving a few to a flash drive. Evan writing letters late at night and sealing them immediately. Who are those for? Linda asked once, trying to sound casual. Just in case, Evan replied. In case of what? Evan looked at her. In case I forget. She laughed awkwardly, uneasy but unwilling to dig deeper. That was her talent, stepping back just before things became uncomfortable. One afternoon, Daniel returned home early and found Evan asleep on the couch. His brother's breathing was shallow, his face unusually calm. On the coffee table lay a hospital receipt. Daniel picked it up, heart pounding. Blood work. Imaging. Oncology department. His hands trembled. Evan, he whispered. Evan opened his eyes slowly. You're home early. Daniel held up the paper. What is this? Evan glanced at it. You shouldn't have looked. Are you sick? Daniel asked, voice tight. How sick? Evan sat up with effort. It doesn't concern you. Daniel laughed sharply. We're family. Evan met his eyes, expression flat. Are we? The words hit harder than anger. Daniel swallowed. Tell me the truth. Evan looked away. You don't want it. Yes, I do. No, Evan said quietly. You want peace. Truth breaks peace. Daniel stood there, helpless, as Evan walked past him toward his room. For the first time, Daniel felt fear not of illness, but of distance he could not cross. That night, Evan updated his notebook. Things to do before the end. Sort important documents. Return library books. Finish school assignments early. Say what needs to be said, maybe. He stared at the last line for a long time. Then he crossed out maybe. Outside his door, Linda stood again, listening to the sound of pen against paper. A mother's instinct screamed at her that something was terribly wrong. But fear kept her rooted in place. Inside the room, Evan closed the notebook and lay down. He wasn't waiting for love. He was waiting for time to run out. The truth did not come out gently. It broke through the Moore family like a sudden storm, loud and merciless, leaving no room to pretend anymore. Daniel was the one who forced it. He followed Evan to the hospital 2 days later, standing outside the consultation room long enough to hear Dr. Harris say the word that changed everything. Terminal. Daniel felt the ground drop beneath his feet. That evening, he placed the hospital report on the dining table and waited. What is this? Richard asked, picking it up. Linda's face drained of color as she read. The room went silent. No, she whispered. This must be wrong. Richard turned sharply toward Evan, who stood calmly near the doorway. Explain. There's nothing to explain, Evan said. It's all there. Linda rushed forward. How long have you known? A while. And you didn't tell us? Her voice cracked. Why didn't you tell your mother? Evan looked at her, eyes steady. You never asked why I stopped needing you. The words struck like a slap. Richard slammed the report onto the table. This is serious. You don't get to decide these things alone. I decided alone my whole life, Evan replied. This is no different. From that night on, everything changed. Too suddenly. Too loudly. Linda began knocking on Evan's door every morning. Did you sleep well? Do you want breakfast? Let me drive you to school. Evan declined every time. Richard cancelled meetings to come home earlier. He tried awkward conversations, offering help, asking about school, about plans. Daniel hovered constantly, watching Evan eat, walk, breathe as if afraid he would disappear if left alone. Even Emma became quieter, her eyes following Evan with confusion and fear. The house filled with care. But it felt heavy. Forced. Unwelcome. You should eat more, Linda said one evening, placing a bowl of soup in front of Evan. I'm not hungry. You need strength. For what? Evan asked calmly. Linda froze. To get better, she said, though she knew it wasn't true. Evan pushed the bowl back gently. Please stop. Stop what? Linda snapped, exhaustion and guilt spilling over. Trying to be your mother. You're trying to be a stranger who feels guilty, Evan replied. There's a difference. The spoon clattered to the table. I'm your mother, Linda cried. I carried you for 9 months. Yes, Evan said quietly. And then you put me down. Silence. Even Richard had nothing to say. That night, Richard entered Evan's room for the first time in years. He stood stiffly near the door. I don't know how to talk to you. I know, Evan replied. Richard exhaled sharply. I thought providing for you was enough. It was enough for you, Evan said. Richard closed his eyes. I failed you. Evan looked at him, searching for something: anger, satisfaction, relief. There was nothing. "You're late," Evan said. "That's all." Richard opened his mouth, then closed it again. For the first time in his life, he had no authority here. The next day, Dr. Harris requested a family meeting. Evan sat silently as his prognosis was explained. Treatment options. Pain management. Time frames spoken in careful, gentle words. Linda cried openly. Emma held Daniel's hand. Richard stared at the floor. Evan felt like an observer at his own funeral. When they left the room, Linda grabbed his hand tightly. "We'll stay with you. Every day." Evan pulled his hand away, not roughly, but firmly. "You don't miss me," he said. "You miss the idea of me dying." The words landed like a blow. "That's not true," Daniel whispered. "It is," Evan replied. "If I were healthy, you'd still walk past my door." No one argued. Because they all knew. That night, Evan packed a small bag. "Where are you going?" Linda asked, panic rising. "I asked Dr. Harris about hospice care," Evan said. "I'll be more comfortable there." "No," Linda said immediately. "You're staying here." "This house doesn't feel like home," Evan replied. "It never did." Linda collapsed into a chair, sobbing. Evan paused at the door, hesitating just long enough to speak one last sentence that night. "I don't hate you," he said. "I just don't belong here." The door closed softly behind him. And for the first time, the Moore family understood. Love, when delayed too long, could become a stranger. The house was quiet in a way that made every sound, footsteps, the ticking clock, feel heavier. Evan's absence left a hollow space, one no one could ignore. Linda refused to leave the room where he had slept, clutching his discarded sweater to her chest. Richard sat in the study, staring at a blank screen, unable to focus. Daniel paced back and forth, wringing his hands. Evan's choice to move to hospice care had shattered the fragile balance of the family. Now, each member wrestled with their guilt, their regrets, and the painful knowledge that they had waited too long. Evan, however, was calm. He had organized his belongings, written letters, and even returned old library books and borrowed items. He moved through his days methodically, refusing pity. Dr. Harris entered the room one afternoon. "How are you feeling today?" "Acceptable," Evan replied. The doctor sighed. "The family, they want to see you. They're waiting outside." "I think it's time." Evan didn't respond immediately. Finally, he said, "Let them in." The first to enter was Richard. He avoided eye contact, moving slowly as if approaching a wild animal. "Evan," his voice faltered. I never knew how to love you." Evan looked at him, expression neutral. "You knew. You just chose not to." Richard swallowed hard. "I was afraid. Afraid I'd make mistakes. I didn't know how to show you I cared." And now, his voice broke. "Now, it's too late." Evan said nothing. Silence hung between them, heavier than words. Linda stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I was too busy trying to keep peace. I chose comfort over fairness. I should have loved you properly. I failed you." "You did what you needed to do to survive yourself," Evan said gently. "I understand." Linda shook her head. "No, you shouldn't have to understand. You should have been loved, like Daniel. Like Emma." Evan's eyes softened, just slightly. "I won't forgive. But I understand your fear. It's still not enough. It's never enough now." Daniel's turn came next. He had tried to avoid confrontation, thinking he had time. Standing before Evan, he finally admitted, voice choked, "I envied you, and I hated that I did. I wanted everything to be fair, but I wasn't brave enough to step aside. I left you alone when I should have protected you." Evan's gaze didn't shift. "Your fear kept you safe. My suffering wasn't enough to change that. I see that now." Daniel sank to a chair, holding his face in his hands. "I should have tried harder. I should have loved you while I could." "You should have," Evan said quietly. Emma, quiet all this time, finally stepped forward. I didn't know what to do either. I wanted to be kind, but I was scared to speak. I thought if I stayed out of it, It wouldn't matter. But it did. It always did. Evan reached out his hand slightly, not to touch her, but to acknowledge her words. You are innocent in your silence. That doesn't change the hurt I felt. Hours passed in a blur of confessions, apologies, and bitter truths. No one cried in relief. No one smiled. Love was present in the room, but it was heavy, strained, and incomplete. Later, when they left Evan alone for the night, he opened the letters he had written for each family member. They were not letters of forgiveness, but letters of understanding. For Richard, you were scared. I know now. For Linda, I saw your fear. I understand, but it cannot undo the past. For Daniel, I know your envy. It explains much, but it does not excuse leaving me alone. For Emma, your silence didn't protect me, but it didn't hurt me either. I forgive your fear. He folded each letter carefully and placed them in envelopes, knowing he would never see the reactions. That night, Evan lay in bed, the room dim except for the soft glow of a bedside lamp. The illness had progressed, pain simmering beneath the surface but contained by sheer will. He closed his eyes, thinking not of revenge, not of anger, but of the time that could never be reclaimed. He whispered softly to the empty room. I wanted you to love me while I was alive, but you waited too long. And in the quiet, he found a strange peace, not of reconciliation, but of understanding. The family loved him now, belatedly, with hearts full of regret. But he did not need it. He had prepared himself for the ending, and for the first time in this life, he felt ready. The hospice room was quiet, except for the steady beep of the heart monitor. A soft sunlight spilled through the blinds, painting the walls in gold and pale shadows. Evan lay on the bed, thinner now, but still composed, still calm. The illness had taken more than his strength, it had taken his energy, but not his mind, not his clarity. Richard, Linda, Daniel, and Emma sat in chairs around the room. They had learned what it meant to love someone too late. Every glance, every gesture, was now filled with the weight of regret. Evan opened his eyes as Richard leaned over, unsure how to start. I wanted to tell you. I love you, he said, voice low and broken. Evan turned his head slightly, his expression soft but unreadable. You love me now, he said. Not before. That's the difference. Linda wept quietly, holding Evan's hand as if afraid it would slip away. I failed you, every day I didn't hold you, every day I chose peace over love. Evan squeezed her hand gently, the smallest gesture of affection. I know. You tried in the end. It's not enough. But I know you now. That's enough for me. Daniel, who had been pacing earlier, sank to the floor, resting his head on the edge of the bed. I should have fought harder to be there. I should have loved you without expecting you to need it. You can't change the past, Evan said softly. But you can learn from it. That's enough. For all of you. Emma, still young but maturing fast in the weight of grief, whispered, I won't forget you. I'll try to be brave. Evan's eyes softened just slightly, the faintest trace of a smile. He had no energy for dramatic farewells, no need for forced comfort. He had accepted this life, this ending, fully. Over the next days, Evan's condition worsened. The family took turns by his side, learning how to be present without suffocating, learning how to express love that had once been absent. Even the quietest moments, holding his hand, brushing his hair back, reading a book aloud, carried a depth they had never known. At one point, Evan asked Richard to sit beside him and simply look out the window. You don't have to say anything, he said. Richard nodded, feeling the heaviness of years spent misunderstanding his own son. They watched the city below, its lights flickering in the evening, silent witnesses to time they could not reclaim. The final evening arrived quietly. Evan's breathing was shallow but steady. The family sat around him, holding his hands, their heads bowed. I'm not afraid, Evan whispered, eyes half closed. I've lived twice. This is the ending I chose to understand. Linda leaned closer, pressing her forehead against his. I love you, she said softly. I'm sorry it came too late. Evan smiled faintly. I know. Richard's hand trembled as he held Evan's. I love you too. I just didn't know how before. Daniel knelt beside the bed, finally unafraid to show all the emotions he had buried. "I'll never leave anyone alone like that again. Not like I left you." Evan's gaze softened to all of them at once. "You have learned. That is enough." He closed his eyes slowly, exhaling once, deeply, with a sense of finality. His hand slipped gently from their grasp, and the room was still. Afterward, the family sat in silence, the house quieter than it had ever been. They had learned love too late, but it had changed them forever. Linda cried softly, holding a sweater Evan had worn. Richard stared out the window, hands clenched. Daniel held Emma's hand, both struggling with the depth of what they had lost. Yet, in the quiet, there was understanding. No words could bring Evan back, but they carried his lessons with them, that love is not automatic, that fear and indifference can destroy what is most precious, and that even belated love must be heartfelt and real to matter. Evan Moore's life ended, but in the wake of his departure, the family had finally begun to live in the way he had always deserved, fully, with awareness, and with love that would never again be delayed. The sun set over the city, golden and quiet, as if honoring him.